everybody, welcome back to my channel, The Francophile Reader. I have received some questions regarding graduate school, in particular applying to a PhD program. And so I thought I would make this video to tell you about my experience applying for a PhD, both in the sciences, because I actually did 1 year of a PhD in entomology, which is the study of insects, and now that I'm doing a PhD in French, which is an entirely different discipline, though the process is somewhat similar. This video is definitely influenced by my own experience, and I applied for a PhD a few years ago, so I know that it is very different if you are applying for a PhD in 2020 during a global pandemic. So what I want to say first is that universities are cutting back on funding. And funding really matters, so make sure that you know how much money you will receive. Never accept a PhD program that isn't fully funded unless you are working on the side and you know that that is going to work for you. Don't take out loans to do a PhD because the academic job market is terrible, and you should only ever really do a PhD because you really want to do it. Certainly keep in mind what your options are afterward. And in fact, you should try to acquire the skills you need so that you can get a job outside of academia once you finish. Because academic jobs are few and far in between, it is discipline-based. I know that in some disciplines there may be more jobs than in others, but actually even in the sciences, there aren't a lot of jobs available for people with PhDs. So know that a PhD is not a ticket to wealth, right? It's something that you do because you want to do it, but also you should treat it as a job, and therefore you should be paid. You should be funded for 5 years, at least 5 years. Many PhD students do not finish in 5 years, so you should have funding for 5 years and at least a few summers. If a university can't offer that to you now because of the pandemic, you may want to defer, especially right now with the job market the way it is and the pandemic. It may not be the best idea for you to apply for a PhD this year, unless again, you have the funding. And I know that there are universities that are funding new PhD students. So keep that in mind. Things are different. My experience, while relatively recent, is not, the experience that you might be facing if you apply this year. But like I said, I did 1 year of a PhD in entomology. I was a double major in biology and French as an undergraduate, and I thought that I would be doing agricultural science, but after a year of a PhD, I left, and now I am in a PhD program in French. I just recently passed my qualifying exams, which means that I can now work on my proposal. PhDs in the United States are a lot longer than PhD programs elsewhere in the world because you do coursework for the first few years. So if you are from the UK, from Australia, please keep that in mind. It's a longer process. In the United States, a PhD usually takes like 5 to 7 years. They want you to finish in 5 years. Many students do not finish in 5 years, so keep that in mind. If you want to finish in 5 years, you need to make sure that you meet the deadlines and see what your options are, apply for grants, etc. So I did a 1 year of a PhD in entomology, and the way that I went about that is in looking for a PI, so a principal investigator, which is the head of a lab, who would want to work with me. And that's the way that it was in a lot of the agricultural science programs. You were expected to go in already knowing who you wanted to work with. This isn't the case for all of the sciences, and it isn't the case usually in the humanities. But it is important when you apply to graduate programs to think about who you would be working with. Is there someone in the department who works in the areas that are interesting to you? If not, then don't apply to that program, okay? You do need to be very deliberate in which programs you apply to so that you can work with the person who has similar research interests as you do. So even if you don't have to already have chosen your PI, think about what areas interest you. And this will be important because you have to write a research statement. Whether you're in the sciences or in the humanities, you need to think about the research that you have done. In the sciences, it's a very good idea if you've already done some research. Maybe one summer at a university or maybe at your home institution, you did some research. Talk about that. Your research statement is very important. It's where you talk about the research that you have done and about the research that you hope that you will do. Of course, that can completely change. You may end up being in a different subfield than you thought you would be in, but the research statement is a very important part of your PhD application, whether you're looking at the sciences, the humanities, the social sciences, etc. So there's a research statement part. And so I completed that. I had done some research at the University of Kentucky where I did my undergrad. And so I talked about that when I applied for my PhD in entomology. And then later, when I applied for my PhD in French, I had also done some research at the University of Michigan, so I talked about that research. Obviously, French research, not science research. And so your research history does matter. So once again, even if you don't know exactly who you want to work with, and maybe you're not entirely clear what research question you want to look at, which is perfectly fine, have some ideas, and maybe even mention some professors you'd be willing to work with. If you do need to have already chosen your advisor, then contact them, email them, introduce yourself to them, and they may ask to have some sort of a phone conversation with you. Nowadays, it might be Zoom, The other way of getting to know these professors is to talk to their students. Make sure you talk to them. They may be huge names in the field, but they might not have an advising method that really suits you. So make sure you talk to their students, their current students, to get an idea of how their approach is, and also to know, are they nearing retirement? If they are assistant professors, are they publishing? Because you need to make sure that your advisor will still be there as standing faculty when you enter the program and in the next 5+ years. So talk to the students, and if somebody tells you, this professor, there's some weird things about them, listen to them, okay? This really matters. No matter how famous they may be as professors, as researchers, you don't want to be the student of a toxic supervisor. You don't, okay? Because you have to have a professional relationship with them for so many years. And you don't want to have that kind of toxicity. It's going to prevent you from finishing, and it's going to prevent you from being able to meet the milestones that you need to meet so that you can finish. So it's really, really important that you talk to the students in the program. Hopefully they have open houses where after you submit your application, if they're interested, they will hopefully pay for you to visit the institution so that you can talk to the students in the program. I know it's more difficult right now, but hopefully they have some sort of Zoom meetings where you can meet with the students without the professors there. You want to get an idea about the culture of the department. If you ever have real questions about what is expected in your field, talk to a professor that you had as an undergrad whom you really respect and who knows you, and talk to them about how graduate work works in your field. What are the expectations? Should you contact the professor that you're interested in working with before you apply, or shouldn't you? I know that varies. When it came to French, I actually contacted French professors that I was interested in working with, and evidently I was told that I shouldn't have done that. It helped me, so I can't tell you not to do that, but I've also heard that maybe that's not the best practice. In the sciences, it does tend to be best practice to contact prospective advisors before you apply. Anyway, talk to someone who can be your mentor. This is also important in the humanities where you have to have a writing sample. So when I applied for French, I had to submit a 20 to 25 page writing sample in French, of course, to show that I could write a research paper in French. And I had this professor who really helped me revise my paper so that what I submitted was actually of great quality. Some institutions, in addition to asking for a research statement, or what is often known as a statement of purpose, will also ask for a personal statement. Now, a personal statement is different. The statement of purpose, or the research statement, is more formal. It's where you talk about your research experience, what you've already done, and what you want to do, and why this university meets, the requirements that you are looking for in a research program, in a doctoral program. Why is this the right program for you? Personal statement is a little bit less formal. You can talk about your own interests and why you got into the research you got into, and you can get a little bit more personal, but you don't want to be very vague. You still want to be precise. If you are ever interested, there are always sample personal statements and academic statements to give you an idea of what they're looking for. I will put the guidelines for a statement of purpose that I found online, and I will also find one for a personal statement. These are things to keep in mind, but again, it varies at institutions. Some statements are optional, some statements are required. Make sure that you write the statements that they're asking for you to write. Of course, GRE scores are another thing that vary. Many of you probably took the GRE anyway, but not all programs ask for GRE scores. I didn't have the highest GRE scores, and I still got into PhD programs. So I would encourage you to apply even if you feel like your scores weren't the highest. And increasingly programs are not asking for GRE scores. You will usually need 3 letters of recommendation. It's great to get a letter of recommendation from someone with whom you did research. I think that really can be a great letter. Ask them at least a month before they're due, and try to badger them a bit, because professors don't always meet these deadlines. So make sure that you get your letters in. And then transcripts. Sometimes they ask for transcripts before, at the time the application is due, and sometimes they ask for transcripts after you've been accepted. And sometimes they ask for both. So, again, read the directions and give them what they're asking for. Don't overwhelm them with more than they're asking for. Just give them what they're asking for. At the end of the day, this is not just about you trying to get into a program. This is about you finding the right research environment for your own interests. This is for your own career. And even if that career is only 5 years and only for doing this PhD, because again, the academic job market is not good, it's still 5 years of your life. And I think that you should really take this seriously. Make sure that you are fully funded, again, 5 years and a few summers, and make sure that the funding is good, okay? I lived in Lexington, Kentucky for 6 years. The cost of living was way lower than it is in Philadelphia. I can't be paid the same, right? I need to be paid more. You need to look at what the average cost of apartments are in the region where you will be living. Make sure that it's at least double. Your monthly stipend is at least double that, okay? As far as applying for programs, it depends on your field. You need to look at the best programs in your field and apply to them. And the best programs in your field may not be at the Ivy Leagues, okay? The best programs in your field might be at a state university. When it came to entomology, which is an agricultural science, I need to look at land-grant universities, which are state universities. You need to look at what the best programs are in your field, where the research is happening, and apply to those programs. But maybe even more importantly, make sure that the professor there is someone you'd want to work with. Don't rush into this, and especially right now in 2020, in the midst of a global pandemic, you do not want to just accept anything. I have heard that only 50% of people who start PhD programs actually finish. I've left a PhD program. I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, right? There are a wide range of reasons why people might switch programs or decide that a PhD is not for them. I think that's perfectly fine. But you want to make sure that, that's the reason why you leave, and not because there's something wrong with the institution you're in, something wrong with the advisor, something wrong with the culture of the department, or the funding is really terrible. You want to make sure that this is what you want, and the motivation is going to have to be intrinsic, because there's no glory in getting a PhD. Right? You're doing the PhD because of this research and the teaching experience, but you need to do it because you want to do it. At a certain point, the magic of the PhD disappears, right? And you need it to be this intrinsic motivation. So ask yourself, is this really what you want to do? Are you fully aware of what you're getting yourself into? And is 2020, fall 2020, the right time for you? It may be. and it only may be in certain programs and not in others. But that's my tips. Let me know if you're applying for a PhD in the fall. I will never tell anybody not to apply for a PhD, but I do think that cautionary warnings are always appropriate when it comes to a PhD because it's so many years of your life. I mean, it really is, okay? There are people who spend 8 years on a PhD, okay? That's like nearly decade. Some people spend 10 years on a PhD. I know that there are people probably watching this video thinking, well, a PhD in French is a terrible idea. That's why it's so important that anybody doing a PhD is doing it for the current program, like that they're doing it because they want to do the PhD and the experience of doing the PhD, but also thinking about preparing for life after a PhD, and what skills that they can have that can be transferred into other fields. But that's for another time. That's a discussion about alternative academic jobs. There are many people who get jobs outside of academia, and they get decent jobs outside of academia. It's not something that I can speak about from personal experience. So I'm going to leave it at that, and let me know if you have other tips, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.